Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cannabis Technologist. I'm your host, Rob Neely, and with me today is the CEO and founder of BrainGrid, Michael Kadanoff. How are you doing today, Michael?
Great. Thank you, Rob. I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Great. Well, I'm excited to do this interview. You guys are doing some really interesting stuff. You're based in Toronto, are you not?
Yes, Toronto, Canada.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, let me give you a quick background to our viewers who don't know BrainGrid. BrainGrid is an innovation firm that's focused on energy and agricultural sectors. And one of your signature products is a unique digital communication platform called Centrola PA, PA being an acronym for Precision Agriculture. Would it be fair to say that that's kind of your big signature product line right now, or others as well?
Yes, we really just shorten it to Centrola because it represents a platform of wireless sensing and data-driven growing. That's our claim to fame. We answer the question of I don't know when it comes to growing in general. Right now we're focused on cannabis growth. Sorry.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Kind of start with the impetus behind the system. Just kind of let's start on a high level and kind of focus in on the problem being solved. So why don't we start there?
Fair enough. One of the challenges that we noticed is inside of precision agriculture, there are a lot of crops, and medical cannabis stands out because there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of variables that affect yield and ultimately can result in a failed crop, a very expensive adventure just in product alone. Right. So the impetus behind it was just to give the grower the peace of mind, answering the question, I know, I can see clearly now, because they always come to us and say, I don't know. I don't know what the pressure is, the humidity is in the grow room. I don't know if there's a microclimate that can end my grow. I don't know if I'm going to fail a compliance audit. So with our system, our platform, we can answer those questions quickly and easily.
So essentially, the product is it's a device in the space. Now, can we assume it's indoor only, or is it both indoor and outdoor?
Right now, it's indoor, but it's an outdoor-rated product, meaning it can get splashed and sprayed. It's IP63, if anybody's technical out there.
Okay.
The idea is it's not just a device; it's a platform, meaning the data that we collect is wirelessly sent with no IT overhead from the grower to our cloud service for representation, for collection through APIs, and without being technical, it basically bubbles up to your phone immediately, so you can understand if there's a risk or something bad going on in your grow facility. Okay.
So starting with the hardware part, I know it's a platform with an integration of the system. Does the Centrola, I've seen pictures of the device itself that's in the field. I'm assuming that it then accommodates sensors out into the crops. So in other words, does one device kind of service, a section, or does one device service all the sensors in a huge facility? Can you talk a little bit about the mechanics of how that works?
Sure. Well, there's two main distinctions. There's environmental zones, and then there's a point. A good example of each is humidity is a zone kind of measurement. We deploy the Centrola usually on the wall of a grow facility because they're metal, and our device is magnetically stuck to the wall. They measure that zone. Typically, one Centrola is used for about 1,000 square feet. If a grower wants to get to the table and measure parameters on that table, we have sensor inputs for standard sensors that the grower already uses. For instance, Decagon is a good example where we can measure EC, pH, and a variety of other things. And that would measure things like point conditions of the plant itself, thus identifying a microclimate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So really, does it depend on, in other words, the design of the hardware is kind of dependent on real... Oh, not so much?
The device itself is, think of it as a one-stop shop. In any one scenario, maybe only half of it's being used. So what it does for the grower is simplify their life. They can connect any sensor in any part of their grow facility, from vault to even server room to trim and dry rooms, and capture the data either by a zone or by a point as they see fit. If they have existing sensors, we can most of the time just talk to those directly.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about microenvironments and why growers need to be aware of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, the best way to, show you why microenvironments are a real thing is we were recently at a grow, and there was this signature of data where we saw the humidity spike down every hour, and it was exactly an hour. And we were trying to figure it out, and we contacted the grower, and it turns out it was the HVAC system, a heat recovery ventilator. And the result of this, it was this microclimate where one controller was capturing that zone humidity and temperature, showed us that the plants were much smaller and more sickly. They were not growing at the same rate as the other plants in the area because of this piece of equipment that was doing this hourly cycle. So That's a pretty lightweight example of where a microenvironment can affect yield and really take out the product. And you wouldn't know this unless you had access to that information. There are more drastic examples where humidity spikes up above 80%, where it's hot, and there's a lot of sugars in these plants, and mold outbreaks are a real problem. So catching that one corner where there's a problem, where there's a high humidity situation, you catch powdery mold and mildew, and you take that plant out before you lose the entire room. That could be upwards of $800,000 in a fully grown room. So
sure. Is it pretty common for a big grow facility to have, a diversity of microenvironments based off of, its design? Do you get that range of differences within the microenvironments? Do you follow me?
Yes. Well, the first thing to note is that every grow facility is different. It has its own nuances, its growing patterns. Even the grower itself has their own version of how they like to grow their product on DNA, nutritional profiles, and even the media they choose. The point is, those environments need to be captured to ensure compliance and traceability, and just to validate their belief systems too. So our ability to talk to any sensor and capture any part of the facility really helps them be better growers.
Gotcha. In terms of scale, Michael, what are the limits in size? I mean, is BrainGrid's Centrola PA, did you say it was one size fits all? So in other words, it could accommodate a massive, 90,000 acre facility as well as an upstart doing just a couple of acres?
Well, yeah, there's really no limitation. And because we don't rely on IT infrastructure of the facility in this case, you can have one measured point or thousands, and they can be spread out across the entire facility or a field. Our focus is cannabis, and what that means is we're capturing everything in the facility, and there's no real limit. And what we've noticed is that the model around dollars per point, it really makes a lot of sense because it's a la carte for the grower and their specific needs.
Sure. The website speaks to Centrola's ability to monitor a whole host of things, from humidity to vapor pressure deficit, to temperature, pH, CO2, quality of light, moisture content. Does it monitor all of those metrics, or is it monitoring symptoms, that then lead to those metrics? As a cannabis grower new to this space, what are the things that what are the mandatory metrics that you're trying to capture?
Well, there's two ways I want to answer that question. The first is, and I'll just turn it on its head a bit if you don't mind, is every grower, every farmer wants to have a direct way to say if their yield is going to be online, if they're going to produce without any question of crop risk, and have a direct measurement, in other words, of the plant's happiness. That, unfortunately, doesn't exist today. You have to do it indirectly through humidity, CO2, temperature, and the composite of those metrics result in a guideline around how the plants are behaving. They are better than not knowing at all, but the point is there's no direct measurement. So our default solution is the most direct way to capture whether the plants are happy or sad. That's humidity, temperature, usually barometric pressure, which turns into vapor pressure deficit, and CO2. That's the default vanilla solution. If a grower has a specific need, then they add on things like pH, EC, flow rate, light levels, and light quality as needed to round out perhaps an information gap that they have. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm curious though. A lot of that's dependent on the hardware, the sensors that you have that are in the field that then complement the controller, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I got your question now. So the idea here is that there are a lot of great sensors out there, and what makes the controller and our platform different is our ability to talk to almost all of them. And you don't have to be an engineer to do it. You just plug the sensor in, and if we know the model number, we can digitize it, get it to your phone through alarms, reports, etc. Very, very quickly. So what this really means is everything becomes centralized. You have all of your data at your fingertips, and you didn't have to rip out anything that you already have.
Got it. It's fascinating to me and fantastic that the system you guys are focusing in on, or the system appears to be focused on cannabis, because cannabis, depending on who you talk to, can be a high maintenance plant. But why just cannabis? I mean, it appears that this system would have a lot of value in multiple verticals. Is that the case, or what? Talk to me about why cannabis.
It is the case. I mean, there's clearly a need to know things in all industries, but cannabis specifically because of top three reasons. There's a need, an underserved need in the industry. As many industries have already operationalized and they're into production, standard production practices, cannabis is still, from a standards and regulatory standpoint, still figuring itself out a bit, in a few ways. More so, it's high value. It's extremely high value. And the risk of failure is still apparent. As I said, the standard growing practices are not established. So we make our goal and our understanding to addressing the cannabis market specifically is to understand that it's a high value crop. There's an underserved need, and it's growing rapidly, and it's medicine. It's really just medicine at the end of the day. And producing consistent, reliable medicine for people who need it through the use of data-driven growing and technology is the answer, is the real answer.
Okay. That's really interesting. Do you guys plan, though, to expand onto other verticals, or is it just kind of right now focusing on cannabis because it's well designed for it?
Okay, that's a good one. So we're focused on cannabis because we choose to. There's definitely ancillary markets within cannabis we could address, for instance, storage, logistics, monitoring the conditions of from soil to oil, some people call it. That's an option for us. We would probably look more closely inside of precision agriculture for other high-value items like almonds, specialized flowers, other medicinal plants, and even wineries, because the same logic holds. But to be fair, there's no limitation to somebody growing something that they have a data gap for. And it's just a sensor to us. We can integrate it and get it to them in very little time. For now, we remain focused on cannabis, I should be clear.
Okay. Interesting. I have a question regarding data as it relates to my past. I used to work a couple of moons ago in a senior product designer in the fitness industry. And there's a whole plethora of smart technology in clothing, and that smart technology providing a host of really interesting data as it relates to fitness. And one of the things we learned was it's great to have that data, but quite often consumers, our users, didn't take advantage of the data being provided. For example, Fitbit It's great to have all this information, all this data, but if you're not willing to act or have the ability to do anything about it, then the data is useless. And I'm just curious, philosophically, what role does BrainGrid have in addressing the data that it's providing? Is it you guys can kind of consult after that when the platform reports, that the vapor pressure is off, you need to do steps X, Y, and Z? Can you talk a little bit about that on the value of the data?
It's a fantastic question, and one I'm personally very passionate about. I'll level with you. I'm an engineer and a data junkie as well, but the last thing we should do at BrainGrid is deliver engineered or data-heavy problems, for the grower or finance person or operations technician to figure out. Nobody needs an Excel spreadsheet is what I'm trying to say to you. So the goal within BrainGrid is to take this data and derive insight from it, actionable insight, through the use of, good old-fashioned rules of thumb. If CO2 is too high, that's a waste of money and it's also a safety concern. So that's green light, red light. That's what we do for our customers. We let them know if things are off the rails in that respect from a very basic standpoint. But, the future of what we do is integrating all of the data across multiple groves to develop insights that are based on grow practices. Thus, you comment on who's doing well, who's an outlier as a grow facility, not just a grow room or grow one plant cycle. Who's doing well, who's not. And, the ability to know yield data and connect it to environmental grow parameters in situ allows you to tune that model and effectively turn on what some of the industry is calling artificial intelligence or machine learning.
Okay.
And so that's in the future. The real answer is that once you have the data, that's the next step. And traditionally getting the data has been very, very difficult for this industry due to the wide variety of grower environments and grower requirements.
Okay, so because it's in its infancy right now, the actionable next steps are really kind of on a consultative basis, but the plan is to develop a community, if you will, or some kind of platform where other growers can harness that data is at a level where profiling actionable steps is done through an intelligent. Okay, so that's really interesting. So that's kind of on the horizon.
It is. It's actually not just on the horizon. It's happening now within our business. If you're not familiar with Ample Organics, they're an ERP in Canada, and they have quite a lot of the market locked up. And our relationship with them allows us to connect those dots, complete the conversation around yield versus grow parameters. And what that means is not only do the growers benefit from, this is on track or that's not on track, your humidity is too high, your temperature is too low, we're also connecting the dots on yield information so that they can become better growers. And that the patient who consumes their product from the grow once it's distributed, they have a peace of mind around how it's been completely traced throughout the entire practice. So there's a lot of benefits. We've even discussed opportunities inside of insurance. When you have your eyes on the prize, you can reduce premiums. So when you have the data, there's a lot of opportunity, and we intend to fully leverage that data.
Okay, that's fascinating. So it's really kind of almost a holistic for the welfare of the whole space, really. Which is an interesting one. Yeah.
It's an ecosystem, and what drives that ecosystem is production. It's about logistics. It's about enterprise resource planning and a variety of other things. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the data on any of that, you can't measure it and you can't change it.
Sure. And given the infancy of the space, cannabis is ripe for that opportunity, as opposed to perhaps other spaces where there's already a bedrock of a foundation in growing corn or what have you. So it's a fascinating space. Given the immediacy of the data, could you imagine, or is it within the realm of possibility for the methods of addressing crops in trouble could change? For example, when we address there's a microenvironment that gets into trouble due to some insects, could the service perhaps change the remedy for it. For example, I wouldn't have to go and blow pesticides on a certain section because the system finds the trouble spots quickly, that, you eliminate those particular crops and negate the need for pesticides.
Right. Well, I mean, from a compliance standpoint, pesticides are not even allowed in Canada alone. So they have a tough time. They have a tough time of using any kind of pesticides other than very light, moldicides. But anyway, the immediacy of data definitely renders the result of actioning quickly. So if you get an alarm on your phone from our system, you can immediately make a decision about whether to address or mitigate in any way. So a good example is humidity is too high. Why is the first logical question. So you dig down through our system and you see a trend emerge where humidity keeps creeping up and the temperature is not being controlled. Your set point is there, but it's not happening. What does that tell you? It tells you that the HVAC system is about to give up, and that before it gives up, we should call the service company. So that could save the entire room just by noticing a trend or catching that right now before it's a catastrophic failure. We see this all the time in cannabis grow operations, where as the phases of the grow get larger and the canopy transpires more, the systems become more and more burdened, and often enough they can fail or be overwhelmed. But catching that before it's a problem is critical, and the service offering we deliver is all about real-time data-driven growing.
Mm-hmm. It's almost parallel to what's taking place with smart technology in cattle in America. I know a lot of cattle companies are tagging with smart technology, certain kind of tags with devices that monitor cows, because traditionally when cattle would get sick, they would shotgun, mass biotics across the cattle. And but as a result, over decades of doing this, the DNA in cattle has been suspect, or they're starting to show signs of problems in the food supply. And so now there's this smart technology coming out where they're able to isolate cattle that get into trouble, and they pull that out, negating the need for mass biotics being injected into a whole, paddock of cows. So it's an interesting parallel.
Exactly. I was speaking to a grower, and they brought up an interesting analogy. He said, the industries and the growers are using hammers where a scalpel is required. By just catching this, you don't have to do an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Is another good analogy. So we fully subscribe to that thinking, and monitoring the environment and what drives it is the best way to mitigate failure of any kind.
Okay. Curious, what the challenges have been, like working as a Canadian company versus the U.S.? I would assume that you're talking to a lot of U.S. companies, and there's big differences in cannabis legislation. Want to chat a little bit about that and the challenges?
Well, the challenges are more on the change management side. I'd start there. Let's say that. Growers are surprised. It takes a lot of convincing to let them know that they can monitor not just one part of the room, but all parts of the room. There's a sense of disbelief when they say we can capture all of this and integrate it into one simple-to-use dashboard that reports alarms for them. So there's that first step. That goes pretty quickly. Show and tell, and it's resolved. But from the fragmented nature of the U.S. as we expand there, we're seeing that since we consider the industry as just square feet to be monitored, and the fact that our system's so easy to deploy and so scalable from a sensing standpoint, we can put in any sensor anywhere. We find that the local state regulations don't really have any bearing or don't really impede our ability to help the grower or be more compliant or so what have you. So what I'm really saying is, as we go from state to state, we're noticing that the needs for understanding where the costs are coming from, whether there's a risk to the grow, whether the grower needs to adjust something, whether the finance person will get their ROI, those remain consistent. And it doesn't matter what state you're in, or what, in this case, what country you're in. So the rules hold. That makes sense.
Sure. Sure, it does make sense. And that doesn't surprise me, given the flexibility and the nature of the product. It seems like it has a lot of value on multiple levels, depending on what it is they're trying to accomplish. And I'm curious, Michael, what does BrainGrid look like 10 years from now, given that we're sort of in an infancy stage of the cannabis space, and you've got some really forward-thinking technology? What will you guys be doing? What does BrainGrid look like?
Well, BrainGrid in 10 years will be a multi-billion-dollar business with me, an old codger, inventing things in the corner, perhaps, while the business is all automated by our software. No, jokes aside, I think the industry is inevitable from a cannabis standpoint. BrainGrid is going to play a role there and help flesh out and legitimize that business and that market too. We plan on continuing to participate in things that matter to energy, to create sustainability for us and our children's children through the use of technology and measurements, and control, and automation and AI. That's where BrainGrid will be. It's going to be right up there with hopefully with the other tech companies like Google and Tesla, to really make a change on this planet and help growers and our society produce better water, food, and medicines.
Mm-hmm. And I get that from the webpage, which I really like, by the way. And I'm curious, we've done some research over here on the microcontrollers involved. And what seems to be, I'm curious to get you to reflect on it very quickly, what's so unique about it is its low power usage. And I know you guys employ, is it the Gecko chip?
Oh, well, that's just the brain inside of the product. Yeah, it's
right.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm just curious because I know there are a lot of IoT boards out there. I know there's a plethora of microcontrollers, and I'm just curious, is the utilization of such a low-power chip, when you read about it and what it's capable of doing, and you've almost mitigated the need for any batteries, which is unusual. But that's kind of the secret sauce in a sense. Would it be fair to say? Or just one of the, yeah.
I would say that's one of the elements that make it really different. Not to focus on the Gizmo, our controller. We're a data company, but our tool, the controller, it stands out in one critical way, is that it's incredibly easy to deploy. And I mean incredibly, like 5 to 10 minutes per device, and it's online. It's reporting right away. The idea behind the low power nature is to eliminate, the needs for specialized electrical work or engineering services. That just slows a project down and drives up the cost. We effectively just brought in all the best technologies, wirelessness, a low power nature, and universal sensing into one product to make it just easy for people to get the data now.
Sure. And an evolving platform to facilitate that.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating. This has been a great interview, Michael. I want to thank you for your time. I wanted to ask you, is there some information we can leave for our viewers so that they can learn more about Centrola PA and what you guys are doing?
Of course. You can visit us at BrainGrid.io or email us at info@BrainGrid.io. We'd be happy to get a conversation going at any time with anybody out there that wants to know more.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, I'm excited for you guys. What an interesting product you have, or I should say platform, and really looking forward to see how it evolves, and I really appreciate the interview. So thanks so much, and maybe we could do it again?
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for allowing us to speak on behalf of the business today.
Great. Have a fantastic Friday, Michael. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
That was it, everyone. See you next time.